Happy September. It's hard to believe that fall is fast approaching because it's still 100 degrees here. But I know some places it's starting to cool down. So I thought it would be a fun thing to create a tag called Dark Academia that has kind of that fall vibe as we're kind of changing decks. And it was a tag that I thought was more introspective and might be fun to kind of switch gears from summer into fall. So I hope you'll join me and do a VR to the Dark Academia tag. It is a fall-themed tarot tag, and the first prompt is the library's secret. And for that, I picked the Hush Tarot. And this prompt is about a deck that you find yourself drawn to for its hidden depths and mysteries. And I picked the Hush Tarot because there's so many little hidden details in this deck, and it is kind of about decay and going into that decay and just letting it happen. And you know, we're going into fall, so I thought this seems like a great deck to use for that. And sometimes I'll use this deck all the way through November, December. This is a beautiful deck. When I originally got it, I didn't always make sense the way some of the suits were and some of the cards were compared to how I read tarot. So I went through the Instagram of Jeremy Hush, and then I followed those out to the places where he was displaying the art. And then it would tell about each of the pieces, and it would give you more perspective on why these pictures were in these positions. And so that was really helpful. And now I've been using it long enough, I've just kind of figured out how to make it work. I've definitely seen people that rearrange this deck. I never did that because I just kind of wanted to figure out a way I could make it work the way it is, and now I feel like I do. So there's aspects in all of the pictures that relate to traditional tarot meanings. Just sometimes it's hard to see them unless you really spend some time with this deck. But I do think this is a gorgeous deck, and it does have a lot of hidden depths, and you'll see things in there that you didn't see at first as you read with it. And so it's got a lot of like layers in there that might not be apparent at first. So the more you use it, the more you see its mysteries. So I thought this was a great deck for the library's secret. And libraries have a really cool secret the more you're in them, especially old university libraries. It's amazing sometimes what you can find in those old university libraries, just like some hidden gems. And it's fun to do that once in a while. All right, next prompt is Inkwell and Quill, a deck that inspires you creatively like the pages of an old leather-bound journal. And I picked the Bad Girl Tarot by Katie Skelly. And the reason that I picked this one is because this deck is inspiring. It's just fun and playful. It reminds you to take life less seriously and that everything doesn't have to be perfect, but it can still be fun, sexy, having a good time, and just doing all kinds of fun things without it being serious. Just use your creativity. And this deck is all about creativity to me. And I often use it when I've been kind of serious and I just want to come home, have some fun, do a relaxing reading to unwind. I'll pick up this tarot. It's such a cute, funny tarot. And it's really clever in this simple way. And so it is very inspiring to me. I do think this deck might be out of print at the moment. I think I showed it not very long ago, and I think at that time the tarot deck was in print and the oracle was out of print. Now I think the oracle's back in print and the tarot's out of print. And I'm not 100% sure what the plans are for this, but I think things just come in and out of print. on the shop, and I'm not sure where things are right now, but I will try and link the shop down below. Isn't that a fun devil? So that you can just kind of keep an eye on it if you want, because I do think this is a deck that is fun and worth it to get if you can, because it's just a playful, fun deck. And look at the death card to use, and I really enjoy it. I think it's cool. So, all right, next prompt is Eternal Autumn, a deck that captures the melancholy and beauty of fall, embodying the bittersweet nature of change. And for me, that is the Efflorescent Tarot. This is out of print at the moment, but there was a Kickstarter, so I'm thinking you can probably get this deck soon. So this deck is just an embodiment of melancholy and summer sadness, and that moving from one situation in life to another and not being particularly happy about it. And so I end up always just being in a mood when I use this deck, and kind of like that bittersweet melancholy mood. And you don't want a happy deck at those times. You want something that captures that feeling. And this deck captures that feeling for sure. The faces sometimes, look at that, are just so like, oh, this is life and this is what's happening and I have to deal with it. And sometimes life is like that. And so it's good to have a deck that captures that feeling. And this is the one I tend to always go to when I'm in that type of mood. I usually don't film a video when I'm in that mood. But, you know, like, life isn't always perfect. And sometimes you don't feel happy about things. And it's good to have ways to relate and have things in your life that can mirror that moment. And it, you know, usually, hopefully it passes pretty quickly usually. But it's fun to have something that you can transition with. So I picked the Efflorescent Tarot. All right, next prompt is the Philosopher's Stone, a deck that helps you transform your thoughts like alchemy for the soul. And for this prompt, I picked the Sistine Tarot because the Sistine Tarot has been my Philosopher's Stone lately. It has been a deck that's helping me see things through a different light. And it's been really wonderful in that it's giving me answers that I can relate to, and then I can see things through a different lens. And it's really beautiful, so I want to use it all the time. It does have some of the features of a Minchiati deck, like the astrological signs, like Sagittarius there, and the faith, hope, charity. So it does have some extra cards that I keep in. But those have also been helping me expand how I see things. And so this has just been really helpful because there's a lot of changes in my life right now. There's charity, there's prudence, and I want to go forward in a way that makes sense. And I have a lot of opportunities, but sometimes it's hard for me to choose which direction I want to go. And so I'm using this deck to kind of look at things through a different lens. And it's just been wonderful. And the fact that it's so beautiful does not hurt things either. And that it pairs well with so many of my other decks. So that's been really fun. And it's just a delight to use. I love the cardstock because it's linen cardstock. And it was on Make Playing Cards. I had it on my channel when it was still in print, and I think right now it's out of print with no plans to reprint it. So hopefully everybody that wanted it got it. Look at like that chariot. It's just the cutest chariot ever. Anyway, there's so many things about this deck that I just adore, and it's good for everybody, I think, to have a deck that is that Philosopher's Stone for them, that helps them see things through a different light. That's one of the things I love about tarot, is different decks help you see things differently. And then each deck will kind of have like a theme and a way that it's used. All right, so that's the Sistine Tarot by Rose Bay. I've talked a lot about this deck in the past. All right, next prompt is Candlelight and Shadows, a deck that feels perfect for those late night readings illuminated by a single candle. And for that, I picked Remembering the Sweet Fool. And part of it is, oh look, there's a candle right there too. I wanted a deck that didn't have a lot of people, that felt kind of magical and haunting. And so this is a deck, I just did a reading with this the other day, and those are the cards, that looks a lot at nature, and it's really beautiful to use it at night when it's candlelight. And sometimes having people in a deck takes you out of that moment, and you know, there's like pieces of faces or something in it, but or shadows of people, but there's no like just glaring people, and then there's bones, and it just feels like a candlelit deck to me. And there's a magic about using your tarot decks late at night under the candlelight, and you want to keep that mood. So this deck keeps that mood, and that's how I use this one. It's really, really beautiful, I think. I have her oracle decks, and I've always just loved them, so it made sense to get the tarot, and I'm just as happy with the tarot. And the tarot added more color. The oracles were more of a grayscale, and they had a little color, but the tarot has more color. But it's still got that beautiful nighttime candlelit haunting feeling. And this deck definitely, it's pretty easy to get the meanings right away, because it does follow more of the traditional pattern, but it looks at it through a different angle. But I do think if you're a beginner, well, maybe not a very beginner, but intermediate beginner, you could pick this up and read with it pretty well. It's pretty lovely. All right, next deck is Ghosts of the Past, a deck that connects you with history of your ancestors and is steeped in nostalgia. And I picked the Antique Anatomy Tarot by Clara Goodchild because there's so much of my family that are medical doctors and in the medical field. And so I've got the connection through that. But I also think this deck just feels like an ancestral deck. It feels like it has that history and energy. And because it's kind of plain and simple, it's easy to look at, oh, what bones are involved in the card I got, because it adds an extra layer. This particular deck is the very first version that didn't have any of the flowers or anything. The new one is mass market and adds flowers in, so then it also has a connection of flowers to your readings, which is cool. But I like the simplicity of this. Sometimes when I want to do those readings where it's just nostalgic. And in the fall, I love using this. I tend to use it all the way through probably December, because it's got that fall, winter energy. So I just think this is a beautifully done deck. Really lovely. I love all of her decks. I think they're all amazing, and I'm just always excited to use them. They go with so many things. Really fun. And I especially love this version. I think it's really beautiful. And I think a lot of people like a little color in theirs. And so the flowers do that for people. All right, next prompt is Scholarly Pursuits, a deck that you turn to for learning, study, or deeper understanding of the tarot. And this deck uses the traditional meanings. Ellen Lorenzi Prince is really amazing, but it also goes into a depth and expands your vision of the card and your understanding of the meaning. So you get a lot more in the reading. And there's a poem that goes with each of the cards. And it is amazing how well it works with the card. So this is connecting the above and below, and it's talking about how life isn't stagnant. It changes all the time. And you have to put effort in and move forward to connect like the universe with yourself. And so it talks about that you're what you're doing, you're fulfilled, and you've done a lot of work, and you've integrated things. It's a really interesting way to, this tarot is just really interesting. And it's unique, and I always learn from it. And there's always something new when I read with this deck that I see that I would, and then it changes how I see tarot, and then it expands how I see tarot when I read all my decks. This deck is really good for that. And Ellen Lorenzi Prince's decks have that quality to them. This one for me totally resonates with me. I like the small cards, and I like the black borders, and I like the look of the deck and the color palette. And I also just love the way it reads. But all of her decks read differently. I saw her speak at Newt's the other year. And listening to her is amazing. And reading with her decks is really cool. And this one, because it's so much about the dark feminine and looking at things through that lens, is just, it's a way I can resonate and learn without a whole lot of effort, but yet study it and expand my concept. Like some of my other decks that I study might be a lot of work. This one has a gentle feel to it. So that's Tarot of the Crone by Ellen Lorenzi Prince. Unfortunately, it is out of print. All right, next deck is Moonlight Daydream. What forgotten verses echo in my midnight mind? And for this, I picked the Lucid Slumber Tarot. The box is pretty destroyed, so I keep it in a bag now. And this is a prompt about what forgotten verses echo in my midnight mind. And this is a deck that is was really meant to be a deck that you live in the dream world and how to see things through that dream world. The Fruit of the Dead. Perfect. There's some extra cards in this, and I do leave them in. This is a unique deck. It's out of print now. I haven't seen it around in a long time, but I'm curious what you guys would pick for this prompt. But for me, this one is that lucid daydreaming, moonlit daydream, forgotten verses echoing in that midnight mind. This deck represents this. It's got that just hauntingly beautiful dream world vibe to it. And I think it's really cool. And it follows the RWS, but it does it with a twist. Yeah, it's kind of different. But it is really just a unique perspective on things. And that's one thing about reading tarot over time. All of these decks just give you a different perspective. And I'm not saying you need a ton of decks, because you can definitely get to know one deck really well, and it can show you different perspectives on things depending on how you ask questions. But I also enjoy having a bunch of different decks that just help me see things a different way. But to do that, I have to spend a lot of time with those decks. Otherwise, they just are pretty pictures. And so it takes kind of a lot of effort with each one of these decks. This deck I've had for a really long time, so I've had the opportunity to do that. Sometimes I get so many decks at once that I don't get to know any of them, and they just get put kind of on the back burner. This one, though, was the only deck I got at the time. All right, next prompt is Wuthering Heights, a deck that stirs emotions like a gothic romance novel. And I picked the Invisible Light Tarot because for me, this deck stirs my emotions. I have a very emotional connection to this deck. I love the photography in this, and I love the way things were rolled back, and then there's this layer on top of it. This deck in this style is out of print right now, but she is redoing it, and that should be out, I think, in 2025. I love how, like, the Eight of Water, we're walking through water and dragging our feet because we don't really want to leave, but we know we have to. And it's not easy. It's a trek. The Hangman is sideways. There's so many things in this deck that just made me see things a little bit differently, in a more an emotional way. Instead of the Eight of Wands being just a bunch of wands through the sky, it's depicted as somebody shooting. So we still get that feeling of really fast movement and really intense, but we also add in that accuracy, because look how she's aiming, and the calmness of the ocean and the power of the ocean behind it. So that this card is just, this deck for me is just layered with meanings. And it also just feels like childhood to me. I used it a lot when I brought it over to the coast. It was kind of the only deck I used for quite a while at that time. I was already really bonded to it. I've probably had this deck for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. So I've had it for a long time. But over time, it has developed such an emotional connection with me. And I don't have that really strong emotional connection with all my decks. But because this is such a West Coast deck, and it totally has that West Coast vibe, it has just like a California feel to the deck. And there's no place else that has that energy. Hawaii has its own energy. California has its own energy. I'm sure all the states are like that, but I'm definitely a West Coast person. And I spent a lot of time in California as a child, even though we lived in Hawaii. This just totally feels like that to me. It feels like happiness and sadness all at the same time. And each of these cards I have a memory about. Like, look at the Four of Fire, Four of Wands. Just being out in an environment in nature where it's this beautiful and you see the sun shining through the trees is a celebration in itself. And I just love the depictions of it and how I see things differently through this lens. And I love the photography style. I think it's just gorgeous, beautiful photography. And it's also got some of that hazy feeling, like that West Coast energy. I really love it. It's just special to me. And it's my deck that is, I'm so bonded to that I have to put it away sometimes because I'll use it too much. Anyway, I love it. It's my emotional deck. It's my Wuthering Heights deck. My gothic romance novel. All right, next prompt is the Ivy Covered Tower, a deck that feels like an old wise mentor guiding you through life's challenges. So I picked the Tarot of Delphi for this prompt because it does feel like an old wise mentor to me. At the time I got this deck, this was really unique. There was nothing like this. Nobody was using old paintings in tarot. And now you see this all the time, right? But this was the first deck to do that. And I used Kickstarter before this deck, but this was the first tarot that I remember being a Kickstarter. And I think that was probably in 2013 or 14. It was a good time ago, probably 10 years ago. You know, now we see tarot decks on Kickstarter all the time, but this was unique. And when I got this deck, I would look at the painting and then relate that to the tarot. And because I knew all these stories from all the books from high school and college, it made a lot of sense. And it was my first experience really seeing something like this layered onto tarot. I don't know today if I got this deck that I would have the same connection to it the way I do this deck, because there are decks that do this now. But at the time, this was just so unique. And it wasn't out of print, obviously, then. It's out of print now, but there are other decks. I have a bunch of other decks with art like this. This one I thought was especially well done. There was just, I loved the back of these decks. I just think it's gorgeous. I loved the innovation here. I loved the meanings of the paintings with the deck. This was the first time we saw the High Priestess as the Oracle of Delphi. This was the very first time. Now we see it, of course, all the time, but it was just unique. This was the first time we had seen Flaming June used in a tarot deck with the Ionian Sea behind her. And it was just such a beautiful depiction of the sun. But this was unique at the time. The siren as the devil. That was just innovative. So this deck is a wise old friend, and I still love using this deck. It used to be my January deck that I would use for the whole month of January every year. Now I feel like I don't do just one deck in January as much, but I use this throughout the year. And it just is that wise old mentor to me. All right, next prompt is Golden Sunset, and for that I picked the Joie de Vivre by Paulina Cassidy. And this deck is about what fleeting joys still linger in the twilight of summer's end. And the joy of living or joy of life is kind of the perfect deck for that, in my opinion, because this deck is just all about the joy of being alive. It's such a happy, whimsical deck. I just really love it. I love Paulina Cassidy's art, and it's got a little bit of silliness, a little bit of goofiness, whimsy, but it's also got kind of, you know, like we have pumpkins here and candy canes, and it's got a little bit of that fall vibe to it, still going into the dark months of the year, but doing it with summer joy. But it's also got a little bit of that sadness to it, and you feel like something's fading, but you want to enjoy the last moments of it. And this deck has that. It's just so unique. Her art is just so beautiful. And I love using this deck. I love all of her decks. This one is one of my favorites. I don't know. It's so hard to pick a favorite of hers for me. Look at that skeleton. Writing into the star. Death. Great death. And I feel like a lot of the depictions here just make sense. I just think it's beautiful. So this is my Golden Sunset. Look at that 8 of coins. Just stunning. Unique perspective. All right, next prompt is Whispers Beneath the Oak. And I picked Under the Oak Tarot for this. The prompt that goes with this deck is a deck that represents what timeless truths lie hidden in the shadows of the soul. All right, this deck is back in order because I was going to post a walkthrough of it, which I have not done yet. But I love the art in this deck, and I love that feeling of hidden things that are seen in this deck. The art is gorgeous, but we also have like relics that people are hanging on to and hidden aspects in this deck. The Hangman, it's in a vortex. Death upon the hill. Anyway, I really enjoy this. We have a different aspect of the star and the moon. So it's done differently, even though it's easy to read. This would be a good beginner deck, actually, because it's got really unique art, but it still has enough similarities. Like, look at the 8 of Wands. Isn't that gorgeous? I always love it when 8 of Wands have something other than just wands shooting through the sky. But that is perfect. It shows the speed and the movement without being boring, without just being like, okay, and same thing. And so this deck for me is really fun to use. And I'm less familiar with the RWS than I am. Let's show you the 3 of Cups. Isn't that beautiful? Than I am with the Thoth deck. And so, like, I grew up using the Thoth, and my meanings are always associated. But this is a good deck that you could use to help you learn the RWS system. The Queen of Cups is the triple goddess, Hecate, Persephone, Demeter, or any other of the triple goddesses that you see. But I love that as the Queen of Cups. When the King of Cups stands with his leopard. And I like the sword suit. It's like got a Norwegian vibe, a winter vibe, and things are hidden. And you have to dig them out in this suit. And that was one of the things that made me pick this. What's laying there in the shadows of your soul? Right? Like, it's got that. Like, it's got a frozen statue there. And you have to find what's hidden there. I like the depictions of that. It's unique. So this is a really fun deck and really beautiful and a really good example of a mass market deck done very well. The cardstock is gorgeous. The deck is beautiful. It's just, this one is worth the money. It's got really nice silver gilding. You know, it might hurt your hands if you had small hands. You could maybe cut it off, but I think the gilding on this deck is just really pretty. I'm really happy with this deck. Well, thank you for watching. I will list all 12 of the prompts down below. So if you want to join in, you can join in on the Dark Academia tag. And thanks for watching. See ya.